welcome to week 5 of History of the Modern World. This week we are covering World War I and the rise of nationalist movements around other areas of the world or the anti-colonial movements. First, I want to start off with giving a little bit of background for World War I. The very common question that arises in respects to this war is what caused the war? Could this war have been prevented? For Europeans, it was not unfathomable about how the war exactly began, but rather grappling with the enormity of the cost and what they really considered to be an absence of meaning. Total civilian and military casualties are at 35 million, the best estimate. This includes the deaths and wounded and missing of the military, also those who died due to disease, and also civilian deaths. So disease, again, there was a massive yellow fever epidemic about 1917 to 1918. Those who were caught in the crossfire for military action, anything like that. And then, of course, you also have the refugees, the destruction of cities, towns, villages, farms, factories, etc., the changing map of Europe and the world again, the rise of ethnic nationalism, the Central Powers losing massive amounts of territory, losing their empires and splitting up into new nation states. And there was quite a bit of uncertainty after the war in terms of these new changing governments, particularly for the former Ottoman Empire, Russia, Germany, and Austria-Hungary. And so really what they're dealing with after the war is how you reconcile themselves with the aftermath. One of the popular movements is, of course, to blame the Central Powers, Austria-Hungary and Germany, because of Germany's blank check, because of Austria's aggression towards Serbia. And the Central Powers themselves are going to blame old leaders, the military, and the fact that the Allies were undermining them or sabotaging them the entire time. So it's a war that begins out of individual grievances, and really the war itself tends to exacerbate those grievances. They do not die with this war. So our objective is to try and evaluate the causes of the war, to create more of a narrative with a common understanding, and then to expand on that understanding of the World War in Europe and to focus on the wider world. So this is not just a European affair, obviously, coming from the name. This war very much ties to Europe's international standing. And as a result, the international community has a very strong response. But they're not really looked at equally by Europe, and I'll get to that in the second lecture. So first, let's look at the contributing factors. First of all, there is nationalist ambition. The 19th century is witnessing the development of new nation states under very particular circumstances. And looking back at Germany and Italy is probably a very good example of this. The unification of those two countries was a combination of conservatism and nationalism. Unifying a country and its people under a conservative government to prevent liberal revolutions. And you're utilizing the idea of nationalism, and so that's how you're really gaining the public support. So for Germany, there was that focus on Prussia's military and economic accomplishments that encourages national pride and unity among the northern German states. And then alliances with other countries are done from the perspective of seeking out the best deal for your particular country. So really, these alliance systems that are created are done not from the idea that you are intrinsically always friends with another nation, but because joining with this other nation means you have a common foe united. So you're always looking out for your best national interests, not necessarily for international welfare. So all national movements and policies do have international consequences because you can't unify one nation, have it exist in a vacuum. These nations are, of course, going to be playing in the international playing field as well. But nationalism could also be a threat to certain areas, particularly if there are multiple ethnicities. because nationalism also very much fused race, ethnicity, religion, and Europe was very much divided among those lines. So nationalism could actually be a threat in Austria-Hungary, in the German Empire, in Russia, in these multi-ethnic societies where only a minority hold power. So it's a very complicated system to use nationalism for this war. Another contributing factor is new imperialism. Now, imperialism is on hold between the 1870s and the 1880s, at least in terms of acquiring new territory. Because during this period, Europe is trying to sort out the balance of power during German unification, during the unification of Austria and Hungary. So, new imperialism is really referring to this second wave of gaining colonies. So, this is where we put in the scramble for Africa, the increased interest in the Pacific, the Spanish-American War, the unequal treaties in China, and a little bit more increased influence in the Ottoman Empire. So you really need to think of this as the second wave imperialism as a treasure hunt or an Easter egg hunt. What resource or area is going to benefit a particular country, and can they find it? So this national interest, again, is balanced against international influence. Obviously against the areas that they are going to be colonizing in Africa, in Asia, etc., but also the other European communities, because when one country gains a particular area for its own empire, other European rivals see that as a possible opportunity loss, and so that's why there's such a major scramble for territory. It's going to take some time to wait and see if your new colonies are going to work out for you economically. But if you don't get them now, you might lose out in the future. So you do have international agreements are actually very common in key areas because there's an awareness that European countries can't really control entire areas. So there's an agreement in Morocco between Germany and France. They both have businesses and relations in Morocco. Britain and Russia have an agreement in the Middle East. Britain and France have an agreement within Egypt. So your imperialism is actually helping Europe maintain peace because there have to be constant negotiations, constant communications to make sure this rivalry doesn't interrupt into war. But as individual countries want sole control over imperial territory, then stress begins to form in these relationships. So in combination with advances in technology, communications, warfare, having global influence and therefore a global empire is seen as necessary to be a world power. So we now have an awareness of global connections, but Europe really views these global connections primarily as used to the home country, not really globalization as we tend to see it in the 21st century. So this competition is going to become very fierce amongst all Western powers to have at least some influence on the international table. So small countries like Spain and Portugal are going to do whatever they can to hold on to what's left of their empires, just so they can have, a little bit of stake into the game. And then, of course, we also see the emergence of Japan and the United States as really emerging more into the international sphere with their own quest for empire or territories to control.